Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our second seminar in our three-part Market Ready India series. Austrade and Wine Australia are providing this briefing in partnership. We'd also like to thank the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for their involvement, particularly in today's session. So today we'll provide you with a deeper understanding of what Australia-India ECTA means for Australian producers, the regulatory environment in key states, as well as logistical and freight considerations for exporting to this market. But before we begin, let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land.
We acknowledge the lands of the traditional custodians across Australia. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' continuing connection to land, water and sky country. We acknowledge the wine regions and hundreds of different nations around this continent and the ancient soils on which we stand and grow. From the Wadani saltwater peoples of the Margaret River in our west to the East Coast Sunrise people of the Yuin Nation and the Southern Island and Saltbush peoples of the Ngayoni peoples of Tasmania. Today and always, we pay our deep respects to the custodians, those who went before and those who will follow, as the knowledge holders of tomorrow. This is Australia.
And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are coming to you from the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders past and present. We also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. I'm Prue Adams. I used to be a journalist on the Landline program on the ABC. So before we get into the content for today, I'll step you through how you can interact with us. At the right of your screen, you will find a chat and a Q&A function. To join the conversation, you can post directly into the chat. To ask a question, simply click on the Add to Q&A button. If you have any tech issues, we recommend that you refresh your URL or browser or add a question into the chat. We have three presenters today who will endeavour to answer your questions at the end, time permitting of course, and a recording of today's seminar will also be emailed to all attendees. So, in a moment, you'll meet our first presenter, Richard Emerson-Elliott, to discuss what the new AI ECTA means for Australian exporters. Richard is an Assistant Secretary at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Deputy Chief Negotiator for the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, the AI ECTA. Richard has spent more than 20 years working on trade and industry policy in multiple federal government agencies, including as a counsellor at Australia's permanent mission to the World Trade Organisation in Geneva. But first, let's hear some insights from off-premise trade representatives in Delhi, Mumbai and Bangalore.
The wine industry in India is extremely challenging. We have a number of government legal hurdles that we have to overcome before even we start off a new venture. Additionally, wine as a category is slowly developing in India over the last 10 to 15 years. Wine and petrol in India are excluded from GST. We are under the ambit of value added tax or VAT, and that is a state subject. Each government levies its own VAT percentage on wines. Bangalore has no VAT, Maharashtra has 20% VAT on the maximum retail price, Delhi has 20%, so it differs from state to state.
I always tell our importers that India is a price-sensitive market. As you know, that we deal with very high duties and taxes, so by the time a wine reaches ex-cellar to our shelves, it's marked up 6 to 7 times. So key is the price, because India is a price-sensitive market. So that is the number one deciding factor. B, of course, the quality and grape varietal. So that's equally important as well. And of course, the third is the way people perceive that label when it's on a shelf. So if you're doing retail, then yeah, good-looking labels are a plus too. We do over 350 to 400 labels from all over the world. So mostly all countries, the major wine growing regions. It's beautifully displayed country-wise. Anything imported is very appealing to the Indian market. New World wines are very popular now because people recognize Australian wines, Chilean wines a lot more. So I think number one in New World wines is Australian wines, followed by Chile. We do a lot of consumer events, and of course we use social media tools to talk about new brands and so various relevant marketing tools which are within the parameters of what is legally allowed.
Mumbai is the wine capital of India. 35% of India's wine consumption happens in Mumbai. The retail space obviously differs again from state to state. However, Maharashtra has now permitted supermarkets to operate. They're allowed to get wine licenses. It is still to be operationalized, but it's going to happen very shortly. This encourages ladies, millennials who walk into supermarkets to actually get to see and get exposed to the different wine labels that are available. Since we've been in the wine industry for a good amount of time, we actually look for gaps in the market. If we find that consumers are looking for a particular grape varietal, or there is a dearth of certain grape varietals or regions in the market, and there could be a demand for it, we first try to fill in the gap. Because it has to be a consumer-oriented decision. French wines have dramatically tapered off. Sales of French wines have dropped. Partly because they're all extremely highly priced in India at the moment. You're also not getting extremely fresh vintages because they don't sell as much. But Italian wines and Australian wines, though one is old world, one is new world, are doing extremely well.
People come and they are not asking us whether I am going with an Indian wine or foreign wine. It will be more imported wine. It will be more about, I want red wine, which is better, whether it is on the sweeter side, which is the label available, so it is on the bitter side, which is the taste available, or which are the labels available. So basically they will come and ask us about the product specification, and based on that, whichever is available, we'll guide them and suggest them. And that is where they ask for a lot of, Australian wine is also one of the fast selling labels.
We are the only place in Bangalore that has a taste and buy concept. So as a retail store, because we have the cafe attached, you can actually come here, taste the wines before you buy it and take it home. So if you buy it over here, you get it at MRP to take it home. You can also sit and have it by the glass at the cafe. Because of that, we get people saying, okay, what do you have today? What's new? What can we try? We like something sweet. We like something not very tannic. So I'm happy, opening wines for such people. We're seeing a huge trend in consumption of rosés going up. A lot of people asking for rosés, and probably works really well with everything that's in India, with the temperature, because you drink a rosé colder. The kind of food that we have is slightly spicier. We do have at least one company that is selling Australian wines in India with us, and they're doing fantastically well. It's a boutique winery from Queensland, South Burnett. And the quality of wines are really good, and the pricing that they're coming at to us is fantastic.
We are a country that we are not going to show you an overnight success. It takes time, our laws are complicated, each city is different, but if you can give us the patience and come here and give us that support for education, for marketing, for positioning your brand, and it will reap a lot of rewards.
Hello everyone, my name is Richard Emerson Elliott, and I'd like to thank, first of all, Wine Australia for allowing the opportunity to provide an opportunity to discuss our trade negotiations with India and the outcome on wine secured in the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, or AI-ECTA. I know you've heard from High Commissioner Barry O'Farrell already about the outcomes for winemakers under AI-ECTA. Today I'll go into a bit more detail about these outcomes, talk a bit about the processes we need to complete before the agreement comes into force, and provide you a status update on our further negotiations with India. So first of all, the agreement, Australia and India recommenced trade negotiations in 2021 with a view to concluding a free trade agreement by early 2022 and to pursue a further comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, or CECA, thereafter. The negotiations for ECTA were not easy, and as with any negotiations, there were sensitivities that needed to be worked through carefully. Previously, we had been negotiating with India for over 10 years, with limited progress made. India's domestic sensitivities on trade, which many of you will be familiar with, stymied our previous discussions. But the changes in the geostrategic climate in our region provided a strong incentive between Australia and India to secure an agreement in support of international rules-based trade. And our strengthening bilateral ties between India and Australia, including strong political linkages were conducive to securing the trade agreement outcome that we have. So the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement was signed in April this year, and it will enter into force once the domestic processes are completed. Australia's treaty-making process requires that all treaties be tabled in Parliament alongside a national interest analysis, and a review is undertaken by the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties, or otherwise known as JSCOT. This committee will table a report on the agreement, including a recommendation on whether binding treaty action should be taken. JSCOT's review and its investigation provides an important opportunity for stakeholders like yourselves, and including Wine Australia and all its members, to make submissions in support of the agreement. And we encourage stakeholders to get involved in the process. Information about the JSCOT's report and its inquiry will be available on the Parliament House website. Once the report has been made by JSCOT, legislative changes required to implement the treaty domestically in Australia must also then pass through both houses of Parliament. And once that occurs, and on the other side, India undertakes its domestic treaty actions, then both countries will exchange diplomatic notes and confirm that they have implemented necessary arrangements. And it's upon when those notes have been exchanged, and after a further 30 days, that the treaty will come into force. So the outcomes on wine, as you've already heard, are significant, particularly in the context of the Indian market. AI ECTA opens up significant opportunities for Australian business to increase two-way trade and to reach India's market of nearly 1.5 billion consumers. Under AI ECTA, Indian tariffs on wine will be reduced over 10 years for bottled wine. For wine with a customs value between US $5 and US $15 for a 750 milliliter bottle, the tariff will be slashed from 150% to 100% on entry into force. That is the first day that the treaty comes into force. Phasing will then take place down from 100% to 50% over 10 years. So that's a 5% tariff reduction each year. For wine with a customs value of more than US $15 per 750 ml bottle, the tariff will decrease from 150% to 75% at entry into force, and then be phased down further to 25% over 10 years. So a 5% tariff reduction each year. And when we talk about the customs value of a bottle, we're talking here about the value reported at the import border. So we're talking about customs insurance and freight, cost insurance and freight, or the CIF value. Given the level of sensitivities in India regarding alcohol and wine in particular, this is a groundbreaking outcome, and it's not available to any of our key competitors. We've also future-proofed the agreement. The outcomes are future-proofed with an MFN commitment from India. This means, in other words, that should India negotiate a more favourable tariff outcome on wine with any other country, India's MFN commitment to Australia means that Australian wine will receive that same treatment. This is an important outcome, given that India is currently negotiating FTAs with the EU, with the UK and with Canada. We've also agreed with India to establish a joint dialogue on wine. This will be an important opportunity for an information exchange and cooperation on production, enological practices, and any other trade-related concerns. The joint dialogue will meet annually or as required and shall comprise both government and industry representatives. We anticipate cooperation activities involving industry in technical assistance projects and the sharing of best practice in policy and regulation. This provides an opportunity for the wine industry to engage with our Indian counterparts and with the Indian government. So the next steps, the full second negotiations, or the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement negotiations, will build upon these outcomes that we've achieved in the AI ACTA. They will cover, among other things, additional market access for goods and services, digital trade and government procurement. And as we prepare for these negotiations, we're interested also in deepening our understanding of how we can demonstrate the superior quality of Australian wine. We want to work with you in the industry to identify ways to demonstrate we're not a threat to the Indian domestic industry, and to explore with you the possibilities for our industries, Australia and India, to work together to improve capacity and best practices, and to establish an even deeper understanding of the opportunities for the Australian wine industry in the Indian market, how we can work together through our trade negotiations to make the most of these opportunities. We welcome the ongoing engagement with Wine Australia and its members. We encourage industry submissions towards our SECA negotiations. Details on how this can be done are on our website, along with a wealth of other information about the Australia-India ACTA, AI ACTA, and any news updates on the FTA negotiations. We look forward to working with you in the context of the joint dialogue on wine once the FTA has entered into force. Thank you very much.
So lots of information there. Thanks, Richard. Now, I'd like to remind you about our Q&A session at the end of this seminar. So if you have any questions for Richard, or any of our other presenters for that matter, please add your questions to the chat and we'll do our best to answer them within today's seminar or after if we don't get time today. So now I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Triggs, Wine Australia's General Manager, Environmental, Social, Governance and Market Access, who will discuss regulatory issues and step us through some taxation considerations for the key states we're covering. Having previously held several roles within Wine Australia, including General Counsel, Rachel is responsible for Wine Australia's strategy development, including the development and execution of an ESG and sustainability strategy for the Australian grape and wine sector. Rachel also manages Wine Australia's legal, regulatory and market access functions, including the administration of the export controls and the label integrity program. Before completing her law degree, Rachel worked as a winemaker, predominantly in the Adelaide Hills, but also in the Clare Valley, Hunter Valley, Oregon and Tuscany. Before we hear from Rachel though, let's look at some trade perspectives on how AI ACTA can help Australian wine exports, along with other factors you may need to consider before bringing your product to India.
India, like the United States of America, does not have a unified wine policy. Every state has its own set of laws, rules, regulations governing import and transportation of wines and liquor.
The free trade agreement with Australia has been the first where there's been a reduction in duty over $15 a bottle, and there's a promise from the Indian government to reduce the duty on other wines from 150% based on a wine price index over 10 years.
The FTA gives us a clear idea that the government is looking at moving from protectionism to more liberalizing of wine imports.
I'm very happy that now with this new Australia-India ECT is addressing the fact that premium wines from Australia should be made more affordable for the Indian market.
However, in the immediate short term, till the FTA does not get operationalized and till the market really doesn't absorb what the actual cost impact of the FTA is, we are adopting a wait and watch approach.
We explain to them the challenges in the market, challenges in sale, challenges in bringing the product in. We shortlist the products, we try the products out, and then finally we place the order. Generally, bottling is done against order because you need to apply a special back label for India as per law. Once that's done, it could take anywhere between 45 days to 75 days for the product to reach the port in India. After that, there is a complicated process of registering the wine. Alcohol is one of those subjects which is exclusively the domain of the states. So states have the right to decide when a label needs to get registered. So some states are January to December, some states are July to June. In Maharashtra, which is the most important state for wine consumption, it's April to March.
Maharashtra is currently the only state in the country which has an extremely progressive wine policy, wherein we do not have a label registration cost.
I believe there are about 40 wineries exporting to India from Australia, and the largest volume of imported wines in India is from Australia. But having said that, keep in mind that the largest volume of Australian wines coming to India are at the low end. So I'm talking about $2 to $3 per bottle.
Australian brands are currently the largest category of wine imports in India, but they're dominated by the entry-level segment. You have big brands like Jacob's Creek, Yellowtail, Hardy's and Lindemans, which cater to almost 95% of Australian exports. The medium and the high-end range are still corresponding to barely 3%, 3 to 4% of Australian exports of wine into India.
At the moment in Delhi, a label registration for the year for a wine is costing almost $2,000 Australian dollars. So it's very, very expensive. It's only a place for serious players, and the serious players have to be medium to large size. They can't be small players. When you go to a vineyard and you tell them you need a special label for India, they immediately start talking about minimum quantities per label. Now you start adding up these minimum quantities and you want to carry a range of Australian wines, you're going to come to a quantity of wine that is maybe a 40-foot container, which is too much to start with. And the import figures indicate that 10% of imports are sparkling, 30% white and 60% red. We imported a lot of very nice white wines. We imported a very nice Sauvignon Saint Valentin from San Michele Piano in Alto Adige in Italy. We had a fabulous collection of white wines, but we found Indians are not ready to pay a high price for whites. They have a perception that red wines are good for health. They're ready to pay a higher price for red wines than for white wine.
Old world wines you sell by Bordeaux or Rioja, where people don't know the region really, and so they don't know what grape variety is inside. So they prefer the new world, and in the new world and overall the wine business in India today, Australian wines are the maximum selling wines. In our portfolio, we do import Australian wines. We import Clovelly Estate wines from South Burnett region in Queensland. We have 4 labels from them. There again, Pati Verdo, which is a red wine. There is a Nebbiolo red wine. There is a Verdejo white wine, which is intensely aromatic.
The most important thing that we look at when we plan an import portfolio is first the brand. If it is an extremely well-known brand, well available across the world, it helps to make our job easier. Additionally, we look for a story. If there is a story to tell, again, it makes our job easier as importers.
Hi everyone, I'm going to take the next 10 minutes walking you through some of the regulatory aspects of importing to India. So it is a very complex regulatory structure. Not only are there regulations that sit across India as a whole, so at a federal level, but there are also regulations at a state level, and they impact upon the taxation treatment in particular of wine. And it does make some markets much more viable than others, so it's important that you understand them. India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and it's the second most populous country with 485 million above legal drinking age of 25 years, and millennials making up 50% of wine drinkers in India. So it has the world's largest youth population, and they are open to experimenting with what they drink. We're seeing really positive signs in India, but off a very low base. In the year ending July 2022, the export value of wine sent to India increased by 133%, which is significant, but to $15 million. So a huge increase, but off a very small base. So what we're going to go through today is some of the compositional requirements in India, which fortunately don't vary all that much from Australia, the labelling requirements that vary from here in Australia, the different duties, taxation, etc., and they are voluminous, import requirements, and then I'm going to finish just on some tips and traps that are not necessarily specific to India, but that you really need to contemplate before you're entering into a new market. So in India, food safety is administered by the Food Safety Standards Authority of India, and that includes the regulation of alcoholic beverages and includes wine. So much like we have the Australia-New Zealand Food Standards Code here in Australia, they have a Food Safety and Standards Act, and within that there are alcoholic beverage standards, including regulations relating to labelling and display, and of course import regulations as well. One thing to note of difference, though, is the drivers, the policy drivers behind a lot of the regulation in wine in India. So I always love to bring this quote up, Benjamin Franklin saying, "In wine there is wisdom, in beer there is freedom, and in water there is bacteria." And it may sound like a strange thing to be talking about, but I think we need to really draw attention to the fact that in a lot of countries where there aren't necessarily very well-established wine regulatory systems, there are concerns with all food, including alcoholic beverages, around sanitation. And we spend a lot of time when we're talking to regulators overseas talking about the importance of ensuring that naturally fermented beverages like wine and like beer are not regulated in the same way as, say, spirits are, because or fruit juice or the like, because quite frankly, pardon the pun with my Benjamin Franklin quote here, but there is no way that there is going to be microbiological spoilage in wine. So there's enough preservatives, enough acid and enough alcohol in wine that it doesn't really need to be regulated that hard. And we talk a lot about the fact that if you do over-regulate naturally fermented beverages such as wine, then you really do potentially risk driving illicit alcohol production, which is what we've seen particularly in the COVID pandemic, where we've seen markets completely cut down or prohibit the sale of alcohol, and it's driven that illicit alcohol market up. So not surprisingly, in India, there are some states where the sale of alcohol is actually banned. It's only 4 of them, and you see them on the screen there, all regulated under slightly different legislation. Really important to note in India that there is that one standards authority that sits across all of India, but then there are much like here in Australia, the states are charged with the details around the regulation of alcohol, including wine. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the duties, surcharges and taxes in India, and there are plenty of them. So not only is there the import duty, and we've seen recently with the free trade agreement being negotiated that they are going to come down eventually for wine over $5 a litre, or a 750ml bottle. They've got a social welfare surcharge, a centralised sales tax, and then there are state taxes. So the Indian import duties on wine are significant, and the internal taxation regime is really complex. And in addition to those import duties that are imposed by that centralised government, each of the 28 states and 8 union and national territories has individual taxation regimes. So you really need to contemplate it on a state-by-state level. This is the list of different HS codes, so different products and the tariffs or the duties that are applied to them. So you see in the right-hand column there that it's 150%. The one that I've highlighted there, 220429, that actually relates to bulk wine. So of all of those categories of products, that is the only one where the tariff the tariffs won't be coming down as a result of the free trade agreement, notwithstanding, important to note that there is that minimum unit pricing imposed. So still wine in containers over 2 litres is excluded. That's that 220429. You will hear a lot, I guess, through this series about the benefits of the free trade agreement, but for over $5 US per 750 ml bottle, and that's CIF, so cost, insurance and freight, the tariff reduction is from 150% to 100% upon entry into force, and then there'll be a phased reduction to 50% over 10 years, so a 5% reduction per year. For over 15 US per 750 ml bottle, the tariff reduction will be from 150% to 75% upon entry into force, and again there'll be a phased reduction to 25% and over 10 years, so again 5% per year. I will just note with that free trade agreement, the most favoured nation clause has been incorporated into it, and that means that if India offer more preferential arrangements to any other trading partner, so for example the EU, then they must extend the same preferential arrangements to Australia. Of India's trading partners, only Mauritius and UAE have succeeded in negotiating preferential tariff treatment for wine, neither of which are significant producers for wine. And pleasingly also a side letter has been incorporated into that agreement whereby there's a commitment to strengthen bilateral cooperation in wine between the parties with a view of promoting mutual acceptance of enological practices or word to that effect. So that's a really good springboard upon which we can encourage a dialogue with India on those matters, and certainly will be encouraging them to participate in fora such as the World Wine Trade Group. The social welfare charge in India changed slightly in January 2020. So this is a surcharge that used to be called the Education Cess and Secondary and Higher Education Cess, and that was abolished in January 2020. It's a levy that is at a rate of 10% on the aggregate duties of customs on imported goods, and that's an increase on the previous education cess, which was levied at the rate of 4%. So that went up fairly significantly in 2020. That's something to be aware of. There's also a centralised sales tax. So this is across the entire country, and it works slightly differently depending on how the state tax works. So if there are tax-free goods, which wine isn't, then of course it's zero. If the state tax rate is 2% or lower than 2%, then it's the same rate that's applicable to the sale of such goods in that state. If it's higher than 2%, it's either 2% or in some states you can actually use this Form C for the purchaser dealer to obtain goods at concessional rates from the seller. So that's a centralised tax that you need to be aware of. Then we come to this next slide up. The individual state taxes. So these are different taxes across each of the different separate jurisdictions, and I've just pulled out the three key states here. So 25% in Delhi, and there's also then an excise tax as well. Bangalore, a sales tax of 20%, and then in Mumbai, you've got a VAT of 40%, and then it gets quite a bit more complicated. So the individual state governments have the power to levy sales tax in addition to those import duties. And there are a number of state taxes, such as the value-added tax, and the rate of the VAT applicable to wine or other alcoholic beverages is really inconsistent from one state to the next. So the common rate is 20%. However, it does range quite significantly. And there are compulsory brand registration fees that must also be paid. India introduced a national GST on the 1st of April in 2017, which subsumed most state taxes. However, GST is not applied to alcoholic beverages, including wine. That power remains with the states. So if you have a look at Mumbai there, you're looking at Indian rupee of 300 when the BL, when the maximum retail price, that's the MRP, is between 900 and 6,000 rupees. So that's sort of between $16 and 110. and then 5% if the maximum retail price exceeds 6,000 rupees. So that's if the maximum sales price is over about $110. And then there's also these for each label there's a registration fee as well. So at 5,000 Indian rupees, about $90, and that's if you've got less than 10 labels. If you've got over 10 labels, then you're looking at what can be considered a discount, I suppose, at 2,500 Indian rupees. So that's about $45 per label. Important to understand these concepts here, where we look at this maximum retail price. So it's not, as the term would suggest, it's not actually the maximum retail price that a retailer can put on the goods, but it's used to calculate what the sales tax might be. Where you see that BL, some states will apply an excise duty based on volume, so that's bulk litre, and then others on proof litre. So in a state where the tax is applied at a BL, then that is a volumetric tax, so it doesn't matter how much alcohol is in the wine, it'll be taxed at the same rate. And if it's proof litre, then it's looking at actually bulk litre of spirits, so they'll look at what the actual alcohol concentration of the product is. Enological requirements, pleasingly, in India really don't vary all that much to here in Australia. So regulations don't distinguish between additives and processing aids, but there are a handful of processing aids that don't appear on the list. And I've run the ruler over those. The only ones that I can find that are of any significance are hydrogen peroxide and carrageenan. And hydrogen peroxide, being a processing aid, that's used fairly rarely, it doesn't look to cause too many issues there. Very interestingly, we've been successful in having the same treatment of the water additions applied in India. So any of you that are familiar with the standard 4.5.1 in the Food Standards Code, permissions in relation to water, and particularly the amelioration of high sugar, must or juice to aid fermentation. That's been replicated here in the Indian legislation. It's not a typo there that it's gone to 13.5 degrees Brix. That is what's in the legislation, but it's possible it has been lost in translation there. So clearly the intent there is that it's 13.5 degrees Beaumet, not Brix. So for all intents and purposes, I'd recommend that you take it to be 13.5 degrees Brix as a floor there. Mandatory labelling requirements differ a little bit here to here in Australia. So again, I've sort of run the ruler over these and looked at the differences here. There is a requirement that there's a date of manufacture on the bottle, and that can either be the date of manufacture in fermentation, or it can be the date of bottling. Usually would be the date of bottling. There's also a requirement that the sugar content be included. There's a mandatory health warning, and you also need to put your FSSAI import code on the bottle too. And those are prescribed. So the mandatory health warning here, and that must be in English, Hindu, or English or Hindu, and the sugar content is required as well. So FSSAI has updated their advice on sugar labelling to allow for a range of sugar in either grams per litre or percentage to be declared rather than the exact amount of sugar. And we've been advised from industry feedback that statements, for example, of 3 to 5 grams per litre or 0.3 to 0.5% sugar would be acceptable for a wine that had, say, 4 grams per litre of sugar. So you should take that into account. And that hasn't actually been confirmed by FSSAI. And they define the sugar content as weight to volume. If you are importing organic products, then there is just one certification standard that you need to be certified to, and that's of course in addition to the certification that's required to export wine out of Australia, and also the FSSAI licence details are prescribed. So that format that you see on the screen is the way that the licence must be presented. Product type is also required, so there are some definitions here. Of most note, it's expressly called out here that a red wine can be made with some white wine, and a white wine can be made from some red wine. And also some definitions there around sparkling wine, semi-sparkling wine and carbonated wine. So you need to look at the pressure of your sparkling wine to work out whether it is actually able to be called sparkling wine. If it doesn't have the right pressure, then it may be a semi-sparkling wine, and anything that's carbonated, so anything that's not actually infused with bubbles as a result of that secondary fermentation, must be called a carbonated wine, so quite similar to here in Australia. As far as importing go, the process is quite complicated. So on the 3rd of November 2021, FSSAI published a notification that the Food Safety and Standards Import First Amendment regulations, and that is being implemented or has been implemented on the 1st of June this year. So that amendment relates to the registration and inspection of foreign manufacturing facilities on products in certain categories. So anyone that's importing to South Korea and China, if anyone's still exporting to China, will be aware that there is a registration requirement, and there is an intention that the FSSAI or their agents at some point will come out to Australia and inspect food safety or food facilities, including wineries, to make sure that they are at that safety standard. So we've got a really good dialogue with the FSSAI, and if they do decide to do that, we'll certainly work with them hand in glove. And again, we'll be continuing that dialogue to demonstrate that wine really is a low risk food product. But yeah, important to understand that is a requirement. Some semi-usual, what I call semi-usual tips and traps of doing business in India, like going into any new market. Really careful consideration of distribution arrangements is really, really key. So particularly in circumstances where you're entering into a market where there are multiple jurisdictions, always have a written contract. If you're offering a distribution or you're negotiating a distribution deal, really important to make sure which territories and states it actually covers. Is it through all of India? Are you going to enter into an exclusive agreement or a non-exclusive agreement? Always a good idea to have sales targets. The last thing you want is to go into a market, give somebody exclusivity, not have any targets, and have them just sit on your stock. A marketing fund is a really good idea. Talk to your distributor about a joint marketing fund. Work out what reporting you want. Are there key personnel if you're doing business with a certain distributor, but really you're doing business with a certain individual that you've started up a relationship with? Then do you want to make sure that you continue to do business with that one person, or is it the company that you're actually looking at doing business with? Competing products, so do you want to make sure that your distributor doesn't have a product that competes with yours, and how you're going to deal with dispute resolution. So always make sure you've got a written contract and that you've thought about all of those things up front. Intellectual property, always make sure your brand is registered before you even contemplate doing business in a new market. And again, when you're negotiating your distribution arrangements, make sure that your distributor doesn't offer to do that for you. Often that will mean that the distributor actually holds the trademark or the intellectual property. So very much encourage you to take out your own trademark protection in a market such as India before doing business there. And India does protect a handful of geographical indications, so European geographical indications relating to wine. And of particular note, they do protect Prosecco. So Prosecco, as the grape variety, can't be sold in India. That's me. I hope I've managed to impart some new knowledge, and good luck in India.
So a huge amount of detail there. Thank you so much, Rachel. So now that we've got an understanding of some of the complexities of the regulatory environment, let's look at some of the logistical challenges that exporters may need to navigate with Trent McLaughlin, Business Unit Manager Exports at global logistics company Hillebrand Gorey. So Trent has 19 years experience in global beverage logistics with a wine industry background. He was previously country manager for Vietnam. Before we meet Trent though, let's hear about some freight and logistical issues from importers.
Let's say that there is a wine coming from Australia. So it comes by port, then it is under customs. So we have got different customs bonded warehouse in India. So it moves to one of the custom bonded warehouse, and from there, suppose if it has to move to Karnataka, so they pay the Karnataka taxes. freight rates have gone up dramatically over the last 9 to 12 months. A container of wine from Australia used to cost us $1,000 on an average, and last December we paid $8,000 for a container. Additionally, there was a shortage of shipping containers. There was port congestion in all the Asian ports like Singapore and Colombo. In a country like India, where we pay duties on the CIF value, increase in freight implies increase in duty, implies increase in cost, and finally imply increase in price. We cannot pass on the price increase to the consumer, and so as importers, it's an extremely tough time for us.
We do not make any imports in hot weather because they aren't plug-in facilities for reefer containers. When the container chilling stops, your wine is going to start heating up. So we don't make imports in April, May, June in the hot weather.
In Bombay, we do not have that problem. From the docks, we move the stock straight within about few hours into our temperature control warehouse.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Wine Australia for inviting me to speak today. My name is Trent McLaughlin, and I'm the Business Unit Manager for Exports at Hillebrand Gorey, Australia. We are a logistics company specialising in the transport of alcoholic beverages, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the logistical challenges facing wine exporters currently. It is well documented that there is a lot happening in this space, but I'm not here to go through all of those complexities today. I simply want to highlight some of the key issues facing the industry so you have an appreciation of what to expect when you go to export. I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of slides today, so I only intend to show you a few just to help illustrate the key issues. The major challenges I want to share with you today, as it will have an impact on your business if you are exporting into India, is 1, vessel schedule reliability, 2, container shortage, 3, space constraints on services and vessels, and 4, freight costs. So if I just start with vessel schedule reliability, whilst volumes have started to reduce lately, ports and intermodal networks still struggle to cope with the incoming flows and the backlog accumulated over the past months. Global schedule integrity is still sub 35%, with no real sign of improvement. Truck and truck driver shortages, labour interruption and unrest keep affecting ports' productivity, causing delays, which continue to feed erratic schedules and exacerbate port congestion. What this means to you is that vessel sailing dates and vessels themselves regularly change and can even be omitted. This results in changes, sometimes multiple, to export paperwork, as well as delays to departure, as well as arrival. Another unfortunate byproduct is detention and demurrage on containers, which is an extra cost charged per day after free time has elapsed. Next one is container shortage. Container shortage in Australia has become a long-term problem, which has contributed to the inflated cost of shipping them to most markets. Equipment supply remains stressed. The inability of shipping lines to access empties from the East Coast, coupled with lower import volumes in 20-foot containers, making the available pool for all container types highly challenging. Some shipping lines also prefer to reposition empty containers to more lucrative markets rather than have them filled from Australia so that they can be deployed immediately at destination, as opposed to having them held out at an importer's warehouse for 14 days, as an example. What this means for you is that you may have to wait to get a container and have generally less time to collect and pack it when you do get it. Being nimble and able to react quickly to collect and or pack is obviously of benefit in these situations. Number 3 is space constraints on services and vessels. Besides inflation and economic outlook suggesting a possible demand slowdown and that new vessel deliveries will accelerate in the months ahead, lack of labour, the capacity growth will be non-existent due to the ongoing congestion lack of labour and COVID waves. Sea freight services to Mumbai and Delhi, our most common Indian destinations, are all through Asia, which is hugely congested. So even when vessels have space out of Australia, a booking is sometimes rejected because they cannot guarantee a timely uplift through the transshipment port. I think we all agree the last thing wine needs an extended stay in balmy Southeast Asia. Patience is really key here. We work closely with the shipping lines and have allocations in place with most to ensure space on weekly sailings. However, it is tight and we have to look after everyone. Regarding India, wait times are between 4 to 6 weeks before we can get on a vessel. So as I said, it's best to be patient and prepared. The last one today is freight costs. Most indicators are calling for freight rates to remain high. Port congestions and cost increases, schedule disruption, cost for additional capacity, and ports and intermodal labour unrest, and the obvious one to us all, fuel costs. None of this will necessarily be a direct concern for all of you, as the most common Incoterm for Australian wine exports is FOB. So you are not paying the freight. Your responsibility and risk end once the container is on the vessel. However, it is still good to know, and I strongly recommend you are paid before you export, because freight is expensive and interruption to the supply chain is inevitable. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you for your time, and I'll be available for any questions that you may have later in the seminar. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your seminar.
Thanks, Trent. Now, we still have a short time to cover questions, so if you're able to, please stay online and contribute and listen to the discussion. We have Richard, Rachel and Trent available to answer any of your questions for the next sort of 10 minutes or so. And we appear to have already quite a few in. We had some in advance of the session today. We can follow up on any queries that we don't get to today at a later time. So, and I'll look to one side because the questions are coming up on another screen. So this one is for Richard. Is there any scope for bulk wine to be included in the AI ECTA in the future? And when will the agreement come into force in 2022?
Look, thanks, Prue. Thanks for the question. So the outcome for bulk wine is actually included in the original ECTA. So there is an outcome for bulk wine. The issue that you may face is that it's the same outcome as for bottled wine. So there is a condition that the tariffs are applied on a per bottle equivalent. So if you're importing bulk wine, there'll be a 750 millilitre equivalent calculation applied to it. So you divide your cost by 750 millilitres basically, and then so you will have an outcome. The outcomes are designed around a sort of a higher priced wine, as we've talked about earlier. So it may be difficult to meet some of those arrangements, and we will push further for the lower cost and the bulk imports, but there is an outcome for bulk wine.
Okay, thanks for that, Richard. So this one is for Rachel. What are the total taxes for exporting to Bangalore? So quite specific. Did you hear that, Rachel?
Yeah. I can. Have you got me?
Yes, got you. Away you go.
Terrific. Okay, so the screen that I brought up there in the presentation sets out the different taxes. So you've got some that are consistent across all the markets there, and then you've got others that are specific to the individual markets. I'm just pulling it again. So Bangalore is a market where there is no VAT, but there is a sales tax. So the sales tax is 20%. And that's in addition to the federal taxes. So you've got the customs taxes, of course, and then you've got the centralised sales tax as well, and then that 20%. So hopefully that answers the question.
Excellent, thanks. So we've got a couple more actually for you, Rachel, while we're here. The next one, is there an opportunity for low alcohol or no alcohol wine? And how does this affect tax?
Yeah, so it's going to be a couple of different things. So it'll depend how the product is made and at what alcohol concentration it is, because that will determine which HS code the product sits in. And that will determine the duty that's payable on it. So those concessional rates that have been negotiated under the free trade agreement will apply if the product does actually fit into the category of wine. But otherwise, you do actually need to look at the common customs tariff that will be applied to those particular products. And then the regulations will be different across India under those food standards regulations as well, depending on how the product is categorised. So the short answer is yes, there definitely is, but it is a market by market proposition, and it will depend on how the product is formulated and what the alcohol concentration is. And that's what we're seeing across lots of markets. That's not just specific to India. You know, this low and no alcohol space is really a complex web from a regulatory perspective, because different products will be classified as wine or wine-based beverages depending on the regulations in the individual markets. And they'll also have different HS codes attached to them and different customs tariffs. So that's a long way of saying there are too many variables for me to really give one answer. But certainly anecdotal evidence is that we've heard from industry out of India is that there are a lot of people in India looking to those no and low alcohol products, and it makes sense in states where you've got products being taxed by their percentage of alcohol concentration as opposed by volume. Then it makes those products a much more valuable and potentially lucrative proposition.
Yeah, thanks. So another one for you, Rachel. Is the VAT only applied at the final destination? Are there any refunds or export schemes applicable to transport goods between states?
I don't know about the second question, and the VAT again is applied at a state level. So it will generally be payable as at the last wholesale sale. So much like the system operates here. So again, very much a state-by-state proposition for that one.
Let's throw the next one to Richard. Is the tax system for wine the same for spirits like whiskey or vodka?
I might need to get Rachel or Trent's help on this one a bit because I'm not familiar with the domestic taxation arrangements, but I can say that the tariff arrangements, so the import tariff, yes, they are the same. We did not get an outcome on spirits under the trade agreement, but yes, the tariffs are the same for spirits versus wine.
Have you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, and look, again, it's a state-by-state proposition there. So generally, the different product types will be taxed differently. But in some circumstances where there's a equivalence type arrangement across all alcoholic beverages, and a sort of policy decision to apply a tax to every gram of alcohol, so irrespective of whether the alcohol's in beer or in wine or in spirits, then in some of those jurisdictions they will be treated fundamentally the same. But in others, the tax will actually be split up, much like it is here, where we've got a different taxation regime for wine than we do to spirits. Again, it's really like contemplating a market of 36 different markets, because the taxation regimes just are so variable.
Okay. So Rachel, earning your keep today. This question is either for Rachel or for Richard. This person says, we have a wine range that is free on board $45 to $60 Australian per 6-bottle case, which we currently export to various Asian markets. Can you advise, please, how the ECTA would affect wine at this price point?
I can probably take that one as well. So just to put into context, so for wine, there's the two different outcomes tariff preferential tariff treatment for US $5 a bottle CIF and over, and US $15 a bottle CIF, and $5 US CIF translates to about Australian $8 per litre FOB. So, and then US 15 per bottle CIF roughly translates to $26 a litre FOB. So under the current tariff regime, which is 150%, a 750ml bottle of wine shipped at that $8 Australian per litre FOB, so that's the $5 US CIF, would expect to attract a retail sales value in India of around 3,000 rupee, which is about US $41. So that's sort of that lower level. And following the tariff reduction to 100%, we'd expect that retail price to fall to around about 2,600 rupees, so US $35 a bottle. So you're going to have to do the calculations to sort of translate that back into what it means for your product. But if you do that calculation based on around $5 per bottle CIF translates to Australian $8 per litre FOB, and that's going to translate to about $41 a bottle US in market.
Okay, lots of figures there. Thanks, Rachel. So there are a couple of questions now for... People might want to have to look at that again later, I think, record it and look at it later. So there are a couple of questions here for Trent. Are free on board terms standard for this market? This person says, I'm in discussions with a Delhi importer who wants to negotiate other terms to take into account cross-border transport and storage facilities.
When I say FOB in my presentation earlier, it's the most common Incoterm, but no, in India we're also doing CIF, CFR, so that's a common one too, which is just through to the port of discharge, which is where the responsibility and the risk sort of ends. Going on further, if it's going into somewhere like Delhi, fortunately, there's a rail service that's also used by the shipping lines, so we can actually get it through quite easily through to Delhi. So that's one market that's easily accessible and less risky. Otherwise, yeah, I'd be reluctant, or I'd be tempted to talk more with the importer about going inland. On carriage and things can be tricky. So, and it's usually the importer that will handle that, and I would suggest that that's what they do.
Okay, thanks, Trent. And how long does it generally take for shipped goods to leave the warehouse in Mumbai?
Again, it would differ state to state depending on the customs arrangements. With India, we don't tend to get involved in the customs clearance side of things. It's the importers that have their own relationships and arrangements with the customs officers or authorities. I think anecdotally, though, the customs clearance would take approximately a week, up to a week, in somewhere like Mumbai, which is the most common port, and maybe a little longer in Delhi. So I think in the presentations earlier, they mentioned that rather than leaving it on the port for that period of time, it does come in under bond to a warehouse and is then stored while the clearance takes place. That allows them to obviously unpack the container and return the container to the depot, so it doesn't incur any detention demurrage. But yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
It does, and that was our last question. So thank you very much to all of you. We're now nearing the end of the presentation, of course, so on behalf of Austrade and Wine Australia, we'd like to thank our presenters, Richard Emerson-Elliott from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Rachel Triggs from Wine Australia and Trent McLaughlin from Hillebrand Gorey for their presentations and for answering your questions. Today's session will be recorded, and there was lots of information in there, and you might want to listen back to it and look back at it. We'll email you a link when it's live on the Wine Australia website. Thank you so much for joining our second Market Ready India briefing. We hope to see you next Wednesday to provide you with information on consumption trends, the available support from Austrade, Wine Australia and Australian Grape and Wine, along with the next steps, if you decide to pursue this market. We look forward to seeing you then.